Hello and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duval and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who has seen The Exorcist about 167 times and it just keeps getting funnier every time he sees it.
Tim Longo. That
is definitely a quote. I don't know if you recognize it.
I do. It's on the tip of my tongue as usual.
I was going to use it last time. So Winona Ryder is the clue. She's the glue.
Okay, hold on. Let me think. Okay, that's a Beetlejuice.
Yes, very good
joke. Then
I was going to say hard. I had
right. I was going to say Batman because I was thinking of Michael Keaton. I was like, no, it's not that Michael Keaton. Yeah. Beetlejuice, classic.
Yeah. Excellent Michael Keaton role, early role for Alec Baldwin, real up-and-comer at that time.
That's right, Alec Baldwin.
It's funny to think of Winona Ryder as having been the bigger star at that point, which is not really true anymore, I don't think. But anyway, and Gina Davis, of course.
Yep, Gina Davis, yep. Although Winona's had her little bit of a comeback with Stranger Things, so
she has. All right, so back into our final delve into Silent Hill 2. We finished the game.
Yeah,
and it's a thing. We actually managed to get the same ending, which we'll get to at some point. But it was a different ending than I got the first time I played.
Yeah.
So that'll also be interesting, which explains some stuff that happened to me that was different. For example, you never mentioned the chainsaw.
Chainsaw?
Right, because you didn't find the chainsaw because it doesn't appear in your first playthrough.
What?
There's a chainsaw like at the very beginning of the game.
Like a weapon?
Yes, when you're walking into the town, and I picked it up. And I'm like, that's really weird. I don't remember this from last time. And I just put it in my inventory and I never took it out again. And it turns out that that's a thing that only happens on subsequent playthroughs from your first.
Were you just really good at, did you intentionally not tell me that? Or
it didn't even occur to me. It was such a non-thing for me because it wasn't something I used, and I just remember walking past it and it was buzzing, and it made a lot of noise because it's on and it's in a log or something. It's in the stack of wood that you pass by, and you can get it. And I took it and put it in my inventory, and then never took it out again. It seems
like a significant. The chainsaw I would have thought would have been. I don't know. A chainsaw seems like a valuable weapon to have.
Well, I always used I had so much ammo because I played on the easiest difficulty for combat. Yeah. I always used the board, and then I would switch to the gun if I faced Pyramid Hit. So
yeah.
But anyway, so when we left off, you were still in the prison area.
Yeah, I was kind of mid prison. Yeah,
right, and you hadn't quite gotten all the way down, and so. So the puzzle that you had after that was the gallows puzzle, which was the one with the three.
Well, first, but before that,
right, you were in Purgatory.
Yeah, I was in Purgatory, and do you remember why I was describing it that way? Or I don't think you read the description.
No,
the key.
No, you explained. You said that.
It was in that room.
Locked in that room.
It's a square room. The door was locked, and. So a couple things happened. This relates to we mentioned it. We brought up Ron Gilbert in this context before. I had a battery in my inventory that I had found before that room, up someplace above. I think, maybe in the historical society.
Yes,
and that is the key that I needed for that room, but I didn't know it. And there's a hotspot next to the door in that room that you can put the battery in, and then it fuels the keypad or something like that. Something like that happens.
Well, you can see the keypad. So without a light, you can't see elements in the environment. Or
okay.
James can't. The player might be able to, but James is not able to.
Yeah, but the battery was the thing that I didn't even think of using.
If you ever turn the flashlight off, there are things you can't do anymore.
Yeah, but then the thing, and so I used the battery. I turned,
and then
the light
it makes the flashlight come back on, right? Okay, I did get in that room. Right.
The bugs attack you when the light is on, so
Yes.
you can't have the, anyway. So
you walk straight at the door, and you have to be kind of confident and just go to the lock and open it. I don't remember if there's a keypad with a combo. Yes.
There's a combo, which I was going to ask you about. I don't know, we don't have to dwell on it too much, but there's three of the numbers on the keypad were kind of more worn, I guess, is what how I read it.
Yes.
And so I just randomly found the combination. I didn't
you have to do it as many times. There are 6 possible combinations. You just have to input them until you get the one that works.
Is 6 that's the? Yeah. Okay.
There's ABC.
Yeah, but
BAC, BCA, CAB, CBA. Those are the 6 combinations.
But also AAA, BBB, and CCC.
No, those. Well, yes,
they were negatives. You could punch them in, and they would be
sure.
but
you could also punch in DEF, right? You don't have to punch in the numbers that are worn away, right? I mean, it wouldn't make any sense for those 3 to be worn and only use one of them.
Okay, fair point. Good. You're smarter than I am. Good point. Anyway, finally. So, but it was just like the clue on the key itself, which you can read, I don't know. It's just, it was a good example to me of them kind of not reinventing the wheel with their puzzles every time, but just the opacity of their puzzles. Just, I don't know. I guess it's just the designer in me
sort of puzzles generally. I mean, the puzzle that my first note on this section, because I started a little further on from you, was that the rotating cube puzzle with the faces on it, is pretty dumb.
Yeah.
That is a dumb puzzle. There's no information that you're ever given that tells you what you should do. You try it, and you hear things moving, but you don't know what they are, and ultimately you happen to get out of it, and you go, "Oh, something's changed in the room. Oh, okay, I get it now." But it's there's nothing.
It's a dumb puzzle that is cool to see. It's a cool idea, but not implemented well.
Right. It's bad. It's badly reflected to the player. The player doesn't really have any idea. It's just spin this stupid thing. And the same thing with the number puzzle. Why is it? I think it was the 5th possible combination for me. Maybe the 6th. I don't know. And I just sat there and plugged in, oh, okay, ABC and etc. And it wasn't ABC, obviously. It was like 378 or 389 or whatever.
I feel like the irony of that particular puzzle, though, is codes and numeric type puzzles they've had up to this point. Excuse me, you've been able to find the code someplace. They've taught you that it's either written on a wall or it's in a on a note or something.
It's in a
this
memo.
One,
yes.
This one is just literally try some numbers, and deduce it through the keypad. So anyway, just a little frustrating there because that's where I put the game down the last time, and that if I wasn't playing this for the podcast, those are typically the moments for me that I put games down because I'm just like, well, this is just not, this is just silly. A quick side note that we had somebody on Twitter, and I apologize, I'm not going to remember his handle, but he's a fan of the show. Do you remember who it was?
Tommy W? Was this the video?
Yeah, he sent a YouTube video of this.
I Am the Worst 88, I think.
Yeah, this YouTube series that breaks down games and kind of like, hacks into them and then kind of shows you behind the scenes of what's going on. And that room you mentioned, in that video, the guy kind of breaks down that room with the rotating room. And the hilarious is probably my favorite part of the video. The hilarious thing is that as you're moving the cube, the room is actually moving as well. Like they didn't fake it. So which, common level design tricks is you don't actually need, because you're not watching the room move. Right. So you didn't actually need to make it real. You could just change the state behind the scenes
and play the audio.
And the player will think. But he actually had the camera outside of the room through the collision, and you see the room rotating with the cube. It's hilarious.
That's weird because there's a ladder down and all that stuff. It has to all connect up. I don't know why you'd go through that amount of work, but okay.
Yeah, those days, it's like level designers did what they could. I don't know. Just a funny little anecdote, but yeah. So we move through the prison, and yeah, that main part of the prison does ultimately culminate, like you said, in the gallows room, which maybe I think I wrote down the note. I can't find it right here. Where is it?
Well, this one I feel is thematic. I like the puzzles that have thematic elements, even if they're not. Totally. Even if they're not interesting puzzles. There's nothing really particular about this puzzle. You find these 3 blocks or whatever they are, wood blocks, or stone carvings. I can't remember how exactly they're described. It's tablets? It's tablets, right. So it's the seductress, the oppressor,
and the glutton.
And the glutton. And those seem to represent to me maybe Angela.
No, Maria, I think.
Maybe Maria. I think Angela, to be honest.
What? As the seductress?
Yeah, we'll get to that in a minute. Because we run into Angela later. The oppressor, I think, is you. And
I took the oppressor as Pyramid Head, and the glutton was Eddie, and Maria was the
right. The glutton is definitely Eddie. I think you're the oppressor because of what you did to Mary.
Well, I think you're Pyramid Head as well, but anyway.
Yes, I agree with that. So Pyramid Head, I think, is an extension of your needs, and what you needed out of life or whatever when your wife was sick. But we'll get there. Anyway, so I like those kinds of puzzles because even though they're not difficult, I like that they tie in with you stop and think, why these things? Why? Mm-hmm. Right. And that I think is just
there's guilt, right? Like there are 3 essentially sort of 3 sins in a way, right? With those 3
vices or something.
This sense of, I feel like they even talk about the sin somewhere around anyway. And there's ultimately you find out, right, that there's sort of a guilt behind this stuff too, and that there's a sort of there's a punishment, and you find criminals or hung criminals in the future, not too far from here in the labyrinth, but yeah. Anyway, it does fit with the theme, but that I do want to just really quickly, like that room. Whatever that is.
That giant area, that garden area.
Yeah, garden, I guess. Super, like, one of the creepiest, scariest moments in the game for me, for whatever reason, because stepped out into there. Actually, I went into the room first. I saw on the map it was a big space. I was like, that's different. There's a big space here. Why? First of all, we already know we're super deep underground in this weird freaking prison. And then there's this big garden thing. I was like, what is this? Okay, I step into it. And then I hear that creature, footsteps, horse, whatever the heck it is. I was like, okay, yeah, I don't like this place. I left. I was like, I don't want to be here right now. I didn't explore. I just saw darkness, right? Because they're using the darkness in that. So he's like, you can't see the walls. You're just in this open space, totally vulnerable. And you hear this creature. I'm like, yeah, I'm done. And of course you have to go back there, right? Because that's the main part of the puzzle. But
right. But when you first get there, you don't have all the tablets, I don't think. So
no, it depends on when you went there, I guess. Sure, but yes. You could, but I didn't. And yeah, but just terrifying hearing that thing running around you, and then I started experimenting once I finished the puzzle, and clearly it's just smoke and mirrors, and there's no creature there. They just do a great job with
they do audio. A great job with that, and the audio is meant to reflect the horseshoe that you're going to get.
Yeah, okay. I put that together, but why?
No reason,
And that puzzle, oh man, that we're about to get to with the horseshoe and the wax. I'm like, what the? Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, that room was really...
A lot of these things I got through a lot faster. My playthrough was about 5 hours, a little over maybe 5 and 15, and my original playthrough was more like 8. So
your whole playthrough was 5 hours?
Yes.
Oh man, yeah, no, I was 9.
Yes. Well, and
Maybe almost 10. Maybe almost 10.
I played easiest combat as well, and mostly just ignored combat when I could. So most of the time I didn't.
No, I did as well. But one of the notes I wrote down for this last session was really just kind of revolving around this sense of, I just had this anxiety over missing something, because in the apartments that had happened to me where I had just not scoured enough, you know, and I actually missed a critical path item. And so for the rest of the game, I would leave no stone unturned, no object, touched.
Unfound.
Yeah. And it elongated my time. But anyway.
Yes,
yeah.
sure. So the next big thing that actually happens is we find Maria. Basically, after we get through...
Oh, you're saying through the labyrinth.
Prison, and then we get into the labyrinth, and we find Maria in this cell. Mm-hmm. And it's super strange, because, of course, we think she's dead, because we lost her to Pyramid Head in the hospital. And then we have this conversation, and we're just still befuddled. And James is asking... Oh, so because she says she's not Mary, and he's not sure, because he knows Maria died to Pyramid Head, so he's wondering, well, maybe this is Mary? And then she says, no, I'm not Mary. I'm not your Mary. And he asks if you're Maria, and she says, I am if you want me to be, which will tie into the endings, I think. But
really,
she mentions this videotape that was left behind in the hotel, which is where the game will end. So there's a little bit of foreshadowing of what you need to go and do, a little bit of touching on starting to set up more what James has gone through in the past. But it's such a strange moment. It's.
Did you watch the attract mode for this game? Did you ever let it run?
Yeah, I think I have. Maybe
they show
at the beginning. I think they show her in the cell. Maybe.
Yeah, it's kind of a trailer of all the CGI shots or snippets, and part of that scene is basically intermixed with other scenes, and so I shouldn't have watched it. I guess it's kind of spoiled a little bit, so I was anticipating this scene coming at some point, but it didn't make me intrigued to know what the context was going to be. I will say that this scene, agreed, super weird. This was the scene where I started to get a little worried that I would not get the answers I wanted, because the way the dialogue was written, or maybe it's the way it was translated. James, like you said, James was sort of talking kind of in circles, in a way. You know what I mean? Like he was saying things that didn't kind of make total sense.
Well, I think the players may be ahead of James at that point, where James is just...
the player, I was like, yeah, I mean, you can ask whatever you want, James, because I also don't know what's going on.
Right.
I guess, yeah, it seemed like an important moment that I guess I wanted more from it, because she was supposedly dead, you know, and she was acting... I forget what she said, but it was sort of like she was kind of pleading ignorance of like, what do you mean I was killed? Like it was as if that event didn't happen with Pyramid Head in that hallway. So that's how she was acting. So it was almost like a reset of her character. And so then I was like, well, who is this character? You know, and
that's why I think the seductress. That's one of the reasons why I think the seductress isn't Maria, but is Angela. And that's because I think that the only real people in this space, in some sense, maybe also Laura, but the main real people are Angela, Eddie, and James himself. That those are people who have been sucked into Silent Hill, and that the way Silent Hill has configured itself this time has come from their specific crimes and or guilt and or psychological profile, and that Silent Hill has drawn something out of them to construct this space, which is why I think we run into Angela soon. Angela, that's actually the next, I think, confrontation as you run into Angela. And why I think she's the seductress, I think she sees herself that way. She refers to her daddy.
Oh, it's bad. Yeah,
Right. And I think she's talking about abuse when she was a child, and I think she views herself as the guilty seductress. And I think that James views himself as the guilty oppressor of his wife. And I think that Eddie views himself as this gluttonous person because people laughed at him. We'll get to Eddie in a minute, because actually he's the one who says this town called you too. So you get this sense that Eddie was also brought here. Angela was brought here. You get the sense that all these people were brought here, the three of you. And and that's what this town has made itself for, that it's not maybe entirely a real place. So I don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it definitely, from thinking about those from the perspective of the characters' viewpoints, is an interesting twist on it. I think, and that does, I guess that does hold up. It's sort of maybe in a good way atypical, because we're a game, and because it's a game, and because we're playing in an interactive way. I think I always, and most people would make the conclusion that as you're playing as the protagonist, the perspectives like that tend to come from other characters versus your own character, right? Like there's sort of not a separation, as much of a separation of that, because I wouldn't, until the very end, I wouldn't have thought of that. And I'm not even still sure, based on the end, if he's the oppressor or not. But I see what you mean. Do you know what I mean? It's sort of like, you're the protagonist, so you think you're the good guy, and you think you're trying to help.
This might be one of the distinctions between Western and Eastern horror, which is, I think, that something that we need to talk to at some point. One of the things that I think happens a lot in Western horror is that A, things are explained, B, there is a winner, and a conservatism, really, in that things are returned to their status quo most of the time, so that the hero wins out in Western horror. And then I think that this psychological aspect, where you're asked to put yourself into the shoes of this person and kind of step away from who you are and from your sort of titillation. I mean, if you think about slasher films and like that, you're the voyeur. You're not meant to. You may identify with characters and ultimately the one hero who wins out, but for most of it, you're a voyeur hoping that people will win out. And in Eastern horror, I think when you look at things like Ju-on, The Grudge, and maybe The Ring, although I haven't seen that in a long time, there's a guilt of the protagonist. Exactly. You have to be able to identify with that person to understand why this horror is afflicting them in some respects. And I think that that's what's going on here, is that we are meant to understand that these people are tormented and are kind of bringing their horrors upon themselves in some way. I mean, maybe there's a supernatural force which is helping and abetting that, bringing it on themselves. But that fundamentally they have deep broken spaces inside them that they can't overcome. And this is maybe a test for them. And I feel like Angela and Eddie fail the test. And I think James, it maybe depends on the ending, because there are three main endings, and then a fourth ending you can get if you've gotten the other three, and then a couple of joke ones that you can get separately. So we'll get there. But that's kind of where I fall. I like it. It's very interesting, and it's very unorthodox, and I think with a game like this of this era, with the competition that was around it, it's a pretty bold decision, and they're very, very mature, not in an M-rated way, but mature themes to deal with. And specifically, if your theory on Angela is correct, it both super bums me out that she's the seductress,
and also I struggle with if that is really how appropriate that is. Do you know what I mean? Like maybe accurate
pretty
psychologically.
Dark. Right. Yes.
It's pretty dark and not.
When you see her in the hotel, and she's in hell. Basically, there's all these flames everywhere. She's looking at this picture of this poster on the wall that's like flesh.
Yeah, it seems like a woman's body. Yeah, flayed. Yeah,
exactly. And I feel like there's something about her there that she sees herself as both victim but also perpetrator in some way, and that the flayed flesh is sort of punishment, and now she's punishing herself. You can't follow her. We'll get to the end of the game, but I do feel like, and then of course Eddie does the same sort of thing where he confronts you, and then he explains sort of his psychology of like, people have picked on me my whole life, but maybe it's my fault, and then you were also called here, so there's something wrong with you, and then he basically goes after you. So there's these things that seem to add up to all these people feel really bad about something individually.
I mean, is it as simple as Silent Hill is just everyone's their own private hell? I mean, is it that?
Well, but they're all there at the same time, so maybe there's some Sartre mixed in. You know, it's more than, because they all feel like real people to me in a way that Maria doesn't, and even Laura doesn't entirely. Partly, I think that's because she's a child.
Yeah, Laura is interesting. I mean, this is probably an obvious theory, but I had some thoughts occasionally that Laura was the manifestation of their child if they would have, if Mary hadn't died. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like
and Mary had talked about adopting her. Yes, I agree that that's a very likely scenario, even though she's not, the ages don't add up, right? It's been 3 years.
No, I just mean not. Yeah,
right.
just more.
No,
more than
no, I agree with you. Yes, I think she's a representation of that, which is kind of interesting,
especially because she. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, given the ending that we both got, that's an interesting.
That was just what I was going to say. Yeah.
Yes.
Because of the cemetery. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think I mentioned this last time. I do like your theory quite a bit. I do have a cynicism about that, actually, like giving them too much credit that's actually what it is. Do you know? It's almost too, I don't know. I really want that. I want them to be that thoughtful, and with Angela,
well, when we talk about the ending systems, I think you'll feel they might be pretty thoughtful.
Okay. All right. Well, I definitely, and I know I threaten this with every series we do, but I really kind of want to play the other ones now and to see like what this series really has to offer. Because this one, and I know maybe, like you said, this is probably the high point. So it might be hard to go backwards and play the others, but I'm intrigued. It's just, I don't know. It's the Angela one specifically, excuse me, would mean that they had actually given some really, really deep thought into the psychology of a victim of essentially, molestation and rape from a family member, and this is a PlayStation 2 game. How are we talking
they
about
are in the text? It's there in the text. It's there in what she says. I can't not read it that way.
No, I mean specifically about what do you mean? What text?
It's when she speaks, I say the text, I mean it generically in the sort of everything is a text.
You mean in her dialogue?
In her dialogue, yes. So she's in this room where you meet her, and she talks about her daddy. She talks about how that Maria was beaten up just like Angela said he used to. She says he. And I think he must be some older male relative. That's how I read it.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe the flesh lips are kind of her monster in some way, because of course they show up more at that point. There's one in that room with you when when you're having this conversation, when you have to defend her. There's also I feel like maybe the rooms with the TVs, with the because there's a TV in that room, and doesn't she destroy the TV or something? I feel like
she uses the TV on the creature after
right. She hits and I feel like that's an echo of her own life, because there's a dead person in front of a TV in the apartment buildings.
You know what model that is, by the way? That YouTube video revealed that the model on that dead character. It's you. It's James's model.
Oh wow! Ugh.
So I don't know if they intended, if that was a reuse of assets or whether that was intentional or not.
Well, because you can't tell that if you're just playing the game. I think it's a reuse. Yeah. Yes, because I think anything they want you to know, they'll show you. So
yeah, but I guess I'm specifically I mean, I understand what happened to her. I guess specifically I'm talking about seeing herself as a seductress. That is the way that I don't know. We're kind of out of our depth maybe on this topic, but
or you are.
Well, neither of us are women. I'll put it that way.
Yes.
Anyway, just
neither were any of the developers. So I sort of feel like, well, that's maybe something that they put on as well. But I think it's there. Yeah, so anyway.
It's fascinating. Yeah, it's fascinating, and so let's we can keep going.
Right. So let's. I guess. I mean, for the hotel, I took very few notes because at that point, for one thing, I was trying to get through it in fairly short order. There's not a lot that's super interesting there. There's a couple things, I guess.
When do we fight Eddie?
Eddie happens at the bottom of the labyrinth.
Yeah,
before you go outside, I guess we should talk about that first. He's the last thing I think you encounter before you go back outside. Right. And that was actually, I've referred to this in other episodes. That was the moment at which I went, wait a minute. I just went into this building. I went down about 20 stories and I came out and I'm basically behind the building, which couldn't have been more than a 2-story thing. That was the point at which I went, okay, this is not a pure sort of reality. There's something really weird going on here. That was the point in that game. That's a little slow. So I give you some credit for not for being, I guess, a little bit more suspicious about this whole space right along with it. Because when I played it originally, I got to that point, and that was my final breaking point of like, come on, this makes no sense at all physically.
Well, and unless there's really some deep analysis or explanation out there, again, and some of this is maybe coming from a cynical developer's perspective, I just kind of got the feeling at that point that not that it's random, but they're intentionally being abstract and absurdist in the way that they connected spaces,
right? And in the way that dreams can be and things like that.
Just to make it weird, like that there isn't. But surrealism is what the word I was searching for. But just to make it feel surreal, not necessarily with a motivated. Like, I mean, again, my favorite surrealistic pieces of content tend to be ones that have thought it through some. It's not surreal just for the sake of surreal. And I kind of was worried a little bit that when you come out of that room that was the case. Another example of that I kind of grapple with is, I believe the hallway leading into Eddie's section or around there, and then the room that you kill Eddie in as well has this sort of ventilation ducts that is pumping out the fog.
Right, this greenish gas as well.
Oh, I didn't. Yeah. I kind of took that as just the lighting of the room, but then I guess my point is that fog is a big theme, and it was sort of like there was this. I don't know, like the fog is being pumped in or something, and it's
that's possible, sure.
Kind of a Stephen King kind of thing with The Mist or something. Anyway,
right. That it's the response of something that's humanly done.
You have to kill Eddie, right? There's no way to say.
I don't think there's any way around killing Eddie. I didn't certainly investigate it, but I have to imagine you have to kill him. That you have to. I think both Eddie and Angela are gonna meet their ends no matter what.
Yeah. I don't know why I did this. I feel like kind of a jerk for doing it this way, but for whatever reason, when I fought Eddie, I decided to use Pyramid Head's sword.
Oh, nice.
Against him.
I used the sword against the Pyramid Heads at the end.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah. No, I wasn't that brave. I just
well, I'm playing on a much easier. I think I have an easier combat difficulty than you even have. That's not available on the PS2.
Maybe. Yeah.
I think there's a super easy combat version or something on the Xbox.
Yeah, that thing's hard to use for sure. But,
right, you walk very slowly, and the timing's really weird for sure. Yeah.
Okay. So I mean, as a segue, do we want to talk about one of our topics was mechanics, talking about sort of the shallowness of that?
No, I want to talk about that.
I
want to talk about that in the feedback because we had an email about that, about why we didn't.
Oh, that's right.
That'll be a good time to talk about it. So we go from fighting Eddie, who has sort of a psychotic break, and then decides he's going to kill you because you're laughing at him too, like everybody does. And you go out onto the lake, and then you have this really surreal section where you row. And you're sort of trying to row your way across to the hotel, but you can't really identify where you are. I would open the map, and the map moves, so you do actually get a sense of where the map is centered.
Well, there's the light, right? You follow the light?
Ultimately, you can see a light. I could not see a light when I started, so I just kind of started rowing. I'm like, I think I'm tilting a little bit too far.
You must have got turned around, because if
that's possible, yes.
You see the light from the dock you leave from, but if you turn too much, then the light, it's all relative.
What happened to me. I started getting a little. At one point, I passed the dock, and I was like, "Oh no!" And then I couldn't get back to it, and I was over rotating and rotating. I'm like, "Oh, this is driving me crazy." It's a little finicky. But at that point, I did find the light and just followed the light.
It's kind of like that moment when you're running down that deep hallway, right? There's a few of those. I love those moments. It's again bold moments to put that kind of stuff in an age of impatience,
Sure. Yes. And they have no technological need. There's no need because they're not loading or anything like that, like a later PS2 title like God of War would do. They're literally they've loaded all this data in, and you are literally just walking down this hallway. There's nothing. They're not hiding anything there. That's just part of the experience.
Another anecdote from that YouTube video that we were sent, the water plane underneath you, it follows James wherever he goes. So there's no water. It's just a square around the camera. And awesome. No matter where you row, the water and the ripples with the water are just following. They're just
near you.
Move. Yes. Yeah, they just move with you.
Well, that's good.
That was a nice little reveal.
All right, so then we get to the hotel, and why don't you take us through your experience of the hotel? Because I definitely was blazing through pretty quickly.
I got stuck. Let's see, I got stuck in it's the hotel structure is very very much like the apartments where you have the different. You need to get to the third floor. You write it pretty quickly. You find the key, and we find a map. That is the employee map, and on the map is marked the room number that you and Mary stayed in, and there's handwriting on it of like see you there or something, and you find the key to that room, but then ultimately you can't get to the third floor, so it's the typical thing of like, okay, I got to go up these stairs and down this elevator, and kind of you go around and around, and you're kind of going through each of the rooms. Very very similar. I kind of like the structure. The only bummer of it is just the puzzles, right? Of like you're finding music boxes to use on the main music box in the lobby, and you have to find these 3 music boxes, and so it takes you to the basement and all this stuff, right? And then we need to mention, that's where I got stuck. The place where I got stuck, which was another rule change that they do occasionally, and I think in clumsy ways, is you find a service elevator that only takes one person. The weight limit is one person, which, okay, I'm one person. you get an alarm if you get inside of it, and you can't activate it. It's like,
Right.
well, what do you mean? I'm one person. This is literally the definition of your rule for this elevator is I am achieving that. I've accomplished the goal. No, and turns out there's a shelf, which I did not realize was that I could interact with right next to the elevator.
Right.
That I accidentally found by just spamming my way around. Like, oh, okay, I got a hotspot. Okay, interesting. And you literally have to just one by one take everything,
Put everything yes.
on the shelf. So it's not. So they've quite literally mean just your person. You can't carry anything on your person. And so I literally one by one, you take it, put it on the shelf.
I have a theory about that. I think that the reason why that's there is to make you realize that you've lost the letter from Mary. The letter from her slowly disappears over the course of the game. And maybe by this point, it's gone entirely.
So Laura has a scene in... it was actually in the restaurant, in the hotel.
Sure, yeah.
Where she looks for a second letter. She reads you a letter she wrote that Mary wrote to her.
Right, about the adoption and everything, yes.
About, I'll miss you and all that stuff. And then she looks for the other letter, and then she's, oh no, I lost it. Where is it? And then she runs out of the room.
Right.
Going to look for it. Maybe that's it. I forgot that we had a letter. It didn't work on me because I totally... Right. I see the envelope there, but I was like, oh, it just had the envelope. I totally forgot we had a letter from Mary?
Right. At the very beginning of the game, when you're at the rest stop, the thing that she says that you hear in her voiceover when you exit the bathroom.
Yeah, I remember that. I guess
I dream of that place or whatever. So
you're saying we have an
special
envelope,
place.
Not
we have the letter and the envelope at the beginning of the game. And by the end of the game, they're one item. They're one item, the envelope, and it says it's her name and her handwriting on the outside. And if
I had the envelope.
Sure. And if you examine it, there's a letter inside, which is the same thing that she says at the beginning of the game.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And so you're saying...
By the end of the game, that letter is gone. Yes.
Whoa.
The envelope maybe even is gone. I'm not...
No, I had the envelope. Well, I'm pretty sure I had the envelope.
Okay. Yeah. Well, the letter is certainly gone because I checked. Yeah. By the time I got into the room with the pyramid heads, because I was switching weapons, I went through my inventory, and the letter's gone.
What? That's crazy. And so weird and subtle. Okay, yeah. I mean, this game is something else.
There's a lot of subtle levels. Stuff. Mm-hmm.
I just love this shelf moment. It's, they Metroided you, right? And
yes.
But they made you do it. Like that's the most hilarious
one by
thing.
one, like, one item by one, item by item by item.
One item by one. Okay, I'm going to do this to myself because I have to. And after a few items, I would actually go back in the elevator and see if there was like, okay,
I did too. I did too.
Oh, actually, no. Literally, it's every single thing I have to. And then not only that, it's like, okay, here goes my flashlight. Oh, bye, flashlight. Okay, here goes my radio. Bye, radio.
You have
like these are two critical things.
Born anew, Tim. To go. And then actually, when you're down there, the whole place floods. Besides, I think
that's later. That's after.
Oh, that's right. That's later because you have to do the right. You have to go back to the other side. Right. But yeah, that's after the puzzle. Yeah. The upside down
Stranger Thing reference, but you do go down there and things are bad, and there's some of the mannequin leg people,
right? But because you don't have
no
light,
weapon,
because you have no light, they also don't activate, so you can go around them.
Oh, I didn't have that happen to me at all. Maybe I touched them.
Yes, if you bump them, they also activate.
They were totally on me. Yeah,
okay,
I didn't even know that was a mechanic.
Yes, that happens in the town as well at night. That if your light crosses across them, if you move it quickly enough, they won't turn on. But if you don't, they will turn on.
So there's sort of a stealth mechanic here that I never even found.
Yes, it's described. I don't know if you remember, there was a body in the town with some memos, and it specifically says if you shine your light, they're attracted to light or something like that. It's definitely subtle, and that is a very missable memo. There's like 5 of them on the ground, and they're spread out. There's like a trail of them. They're not easy to find. So
that's interesting. Yeah. So are they not attracted to noise? Like if you turn your light off and you run around them, will they?
They won't.
Will they not activate?
They won't go after you, right?
Oh man, I wish I would have known that. That's probably important for like a higher difficulty playthrough, because you probably want to just avoid combat.
Exactly. I think as much as possible you want to.
But then the tension of turning the light off. Oh, that's pretty good actually. I like that. That's
and you need to turn the light on to use things. So to open doors and to look at the map. Tension. And yes, there's a lot of really good choices.
Reward. Yeah, so then you do like another one of the weirdest. Are light bulbs inside a tin can? Is that a thing that I don't know about? That is not a thing
I've ever heard of. This is the only game that's ever.
It's like, is that a way to
another old dumb weird puzzle? I cannot justify that choice in a million years.
I could not believe it.
I need a can opener. Oh, here's a can to open. What's in that can? Oh, there's a light bulb in the can.
The can opener is safe. Why is the can opener in the safe with like the tape? It's like, they basically just phoned all that stuff in. They're like, well, we're just, these are just lock and key. Anyway, we talked about that enough. So yeah, you get the light bulb out of the tin can with the can opener in the basement with no weapons because you don't have your light. Shine the light on the lock that I clearly can see and feel with my fingers probably, but I need the light on there to use the key that I have.
Well, it's a mechanic. They're following through on it.
Yeah, but let's not go down the rabbit hole of that's not just.
I know.
If you have don't get me started. If you have a mechanic for something, then you need, and the narrative or I guess kind of fictional context of that setup is in conflict with that, you need to fix that stuff. Like you need to make those two work. And they could have there's other things they could have done there. Anyway, they put light bulbs inside a closed tin can. Like all logic is anyway. Right. So yeah, so you work your way. Basically, again, you're just trying to get up to the 3rd floor. You eventually get up there, and you're into like there isn't anything more memorable. I think I'd mention about the rest of the hotel's cool. It's really they really did a good job at picking those sort of core thriller, horror locations. Like I would say across the game.
Oh yeah, sure. A hotel is The Shining, and
prison
is a million things. But
like grubby apartment buildings and a hospital.
Yes.
Yeah. So, but anyway, you eventually get up to the room, and you found the cassette tape at this point as well, and you get to the room. It's hard to. So you put the tape in, and you're watching the tape, and I'm not even sure I could even describe exactly what goes down there. You finally see. I think that's later. You see the picture that you have in your inventory where that picture was taken up above. Anyway, you're in the room and you're filming both of you in the room, and then it kind of wigs out at some point, and It starts intermixing these scenes from Mary, I guess, in the hospital. It's hard to see actually, and it looks like.
I can't remember. I have the sense that maybe she was allowed to go home and that he killed her at home. He brought her home, and he was allowed to bring her home, and basically the doctor gave him the nod of this won't be investigated if she doesn't make it back to the hospital.
That's how you took that. Oh,
that's how I took that. That they knew she didn't have long to live. She wanted to go home. He was allowed to take her home, and the doctor knew. If she had an overdose of painkillers or whatever, there would be no prosecution or something like that. I got that.
Yeah, but that's not how he does it, right?
No, he puts the pillow over her face.
Yeah, I guess. And then, I guess we might jump to the end if I start kind of talking about Mary's.
No, I think
we'll get there.
I think that's fine. Yeah. I mean, because there's not a lot that happens after this. We've already mentioned that the thing with Angela in hell and the flames, and then there is a combat with, I guess it's Maria turning into a creature of some kind. Sort
is
of
it Maria though?
or is it
I
Mary?
feel that no, it was Mary. Yeah,
Right.
you get up to the top. Well, I mean, I guess that's the kind of a bit of the mystery here. The one thing I did want to mention before we get to that end section, when after there's this interesting moment after you watch the tape where your radio goes off and you hear the static. You're in the room still, and the static turns on, which would denote, an enemy's nearby, and you hear Mary's voice calling to you. And I really like that moment, and I wished that they would have done more with it.
Well, because I think that moment is when you recognize yourself as the enemy.
But then it stops when you leave the room, which is kind of where.
Yeah.
Okay,
it's not perfect. I think it's an interpretation. I feel like that's when he realizes he's the oppressor in some way, even if it's not called out that specifically. But I feel like it's that moment where he goes, "Oh, I'm not a good guy. I'm not the hero in this situation. I've done a terrible thing, and I've buried it. I've repressed it."
That's fair.
Right.
That's fair. I guess I wish that was more. Yeah, I guess I wish I would have. Maybe that's just on me for not getting it, but I kind of almost wish that the radio was on for the rest of the game. Then, I feel like it could have been a bolder move to
I
really
agree.
lean into that.
I definitely agree with that. I think that I feel like there are times where there are interpretations you can make in this game that I wish they were less subtle about, so that I felt more. Yeah. For me, so I felt more confirmed in my suspicions about what's going on. But B, I think they, like you said, I think they can hit that. They've earned the right to hit that moment harder, and I feel like they should. Not even to make the statement, but just to have I think most players will not even read that moment at all. They'll think the static is part of the video and not the radio or whatever, and it just won't come across at all. And that kind of subtlety, 15, 16, whatever years ago it was, it's way too subtle. Way too subtle for most players. So,
I mean, I guess another interpretation could be that because her voice is coming over the radio, and you do eventually fight her as an enemy later. So maybe there's that. I do like that it's you more than that, though. Anyway, so that was a nice moment. And the other minor thing I'll mention before we close up and kind of get to that ending section is when from there, you are basically winding your way back through the hotel, but I think on the other side, because your map changes some, and they kind of show different markings on your map. And then there's this kind of a linear, kind of not great path to find your way through to the critical path, and you're going back up and down stairs, and then every time you go through certain doors, like the hotel degrades more and more, which I thought was kind of cool. So it was really the psychological,
visually interesting journey.
Yeah. And then, like you said, things start flooding, and I think that's at that point you do eventually meet Angela, which we kind of talked about. By the way, in the previous Angela room, we didn't even mention the pistons, which in that first room in the labyrinth, which were just horrific, and we kind of all know what they are.
Yeah,
symbolizing. It's not good.
Yeah, it's not good.
So then you basically work your way back up, and then you get to this point where you kind of ascend again, you start ascending through this sort of like these metal stairways,
right,
up and up and up,
sort of like escape stairs or fire escapes and things like that.
Yeah,
they're sort of internal. I don't know. It's a weird thing.
Yeah, no, and it's again one of those non sequitur kind of spaces where you're kind of you go down to the basement, and then you go up these things to this, like the top of the hotel. It's weird,
right? Do you fight the two pyramid heads first before you go up the stairs?
Oh yeah. Oh, and we didn't. When do you jump into your own grave? That was one of the funniest, awesome. Do you remember that? Was that in the labyrinth?
Happens at the end of the labyrinth.
Okay,
that's before you meet Eddie, right?
Yes. I just wanted to. That's just amazing.
I don't know. That's such a horror thing. That's so good.
I can't think of a time I've ever jumped into my own grave in a video game, and then it becomes a hallway that I need to go. It's just amazing.
It's good. Yeah, it's a pretty good spot.
But to further your point about who is real there, if you recall, because you can read the headstones.
Some of the headstones, sure.
most, a
Most
couple of
them.
them you can't. But like,
Right.
they have that serial killer that they mention is there. A few other characters you've heard about are in that graveyard, and then the three graves that are dug up but are not full are yours, Eddie's, and Angela's. So
Exactly. I think that ties in. Yeah.
Anyway, yeah. So you make your way to the top of the hotel, and Mary's there, and she's looking out over this railing, and she turns around and is basically that photograph you've had is that shot. She's doesn't look like Maria now. She's in her
she's married. She's in her much more mirror costume.
Yeah, but then I don't remember all the dialogue there, but I think isn't there some back and forth on James again getting confused about, and he calls her Maria.
Yes,
I think in that scene, and so then I just start going farther afield of like.
Well, my feeling is that that's to support one of the possible endings that goes on. But anyway, you have to basically defeat. She. So there are multiple endings here. I think it's meant to possibly support the multiple endings, and so it has to be ambiguous. So it might be Mary, it might be Maria masquerading as Mary. I think both of those are possibilities.
They're one and the same,
or maybe they're one and the same in some way. And so yes, it's basically a fairly simple boss battle. Shoot this thing a bunch of times, which on my level of difficulty was not many. So I was very happy about that because I was like, oh man, I was trying to get to bed at that point. It was getting pretty late. And
in that conversation I do, and even in the final kind of voiceover stuff, which I guess we'll get to in a second, I am bummed at how they handled, at least in my ending, how they handled Mary's grief and guilt over what she did to James.
Okay, so that part of it I think is actually pretty much the same in the three endings. I think there's basically the ending is split. There's a part which is you at Mary's bedside, where she's talking to you, and that's what you're talking about. And then I think it's after that you get three different endings. I'm
talking about that as well as the letter, the text crawl that she's narrating.
Sure, right, and that's the second half. Sure.
Okay, so tell me about. I mean, turning her. I guess what I mean is turning her into a boss enemy.
Yes, I'm not crazy about that. Although it is this is the thing he needs to overcome. It doesn't feel like it feels like. It feels like there's multiple parts of that he needs to overcome the sort of id part of that, which is maybe he had lust or something for someone while he was, and that's what the Pyramid Head battle is about. And then a second part, which is this guilt over killing her basically, but having to kill her again doesn't seem like the right way to resolve that. And then to immediately follow that with her basically forgiving him.
It doesn't quite add up. Add up the way that I. But again, maybe we're over.
Western again, it's also this is all in some sense constructed from James and not really from Mary, in my view. And so maybe that's what he needs. He needs his imagination of Mary to forgive him, and so maybe that's allowed. But maybe he also needs to kill her again. I don't know, right? I mean, there's stuff like that in Naked Lunch, right? So it's that's a thing, I guess. I don't know.
I guess it's just subtle enough to where. Yeah, we don't want to rabbit hole in this, but like, if that's what they're going for, they have a responsibility to. Like, you're making some pretty intense commentary there. You know what I mean?
Yes.
That will be
and I don't think they communicate it quite well enough.
No, I mean, if you're trying to make, I don't know. You ever, like, So
let's briefly hit on the
Talk to me about the endings,
So there's multiple endings. The endings are dependent on your behavior as a player. And there are 3 endings that are available to you on your first playthrough. And on subsequent playthroughs, you can get the other ones. And at least on the Xbox, it just keeps track from your overall save data On the PS2, you might have had to restart from the save that you finish. At the end of the game, you can save the game. But they are based on things like the choices that you make. So the ending that we both got was the leave ending, which is that James leaves Silent Hill. And in this ending, you have to have acted like you wanted to survive. So you have to have gone through and kept your stamina high, your health high. If you meet Maria, you need to kind of keep moving on so you don't spend a lot of time with Maria. And when you are in the hotel at the end, sorry, my throat's seizing up. There's that conversation of her in bed that you hear while you're in that hotel to the Pyramid Head battle. If you rush through that, you can actually skip parts of that, and that, I guess, is a negative thing as well. So if you've done all those things and you don't get the Maria ending, which I'll describe in a minute, you'll get the leave ending where Laura leaves through the graveyard, you leave through the graveyard, and you get a letter that is contextual. In direct contrast to that is the in-water ending. And this one tracks to see whether you're suicidal. So there is the knife that Angela is thinking about killing herself with. You can examine that in your inventory, and that counts towards the in-water ending. There is...
Which I did.
Right, but there's a bunch of things that you should do. And so also being at low health. So
these are flags that they're
there's a bunch, there's several things. After viewing the videotape, you can go back to there's a room that has a recorded conversation that you can listen to. You can listen to that whole conversation in the hallway, as opposed to not getting the whole conversation in the leave ending. And if you're actually at low health, often you'll get the in water. And I almost feel like that's the most important thing, because the first time I played, I got the in water ending, and I played on a harder combat difficulty, and I know I didn't have the resources, and I know I stunk at the combat, and killed a lot more things than I needed to, and probably spent a lot more time in low health status as it was. And then finally, there's a Maria ending. So the in-water ending basically ends with you taking Mary with you and committing suicide in the lake. Or maybe you just commit suicide in the lake. But it basically, after you see the scene with her in the hospital bed, you the screen fades to water, and there's like bubbles going up, and get the sense
you drown yourself?
That you drowned yourself. And it basically ends with, and you were never seen from again sort of ending. And then the final one that you can get in the first 3 playthroughs is Maria. And you can basically end up leaving Silent Hill with Maria. And she becomes your new life companion or something. So basically, if you spend a lot of time with Maria, if you extend the time you can spend with her in the hospital, if you check on her a lot when she's in the bed in the hospital, like if you keep coming back to that room before you go to the other side, and if you try to examine her room, the cell that she's in the labyrinth again, there's a number of different sort of ways. And anytime she tells you to go somewhere, if you try to go straight there, like as quickly as you can, it says, in what I read. I haven't had this ending, so I don't know. Oh, and not to reinforce any connection to Mary. So things like the conversation in that long corridor at the end before the Pyramid Heads, you also want to have that cut off as quickly as you can. So there are things that they're tracking and trying to understand the state of James as you play him in the first playthrough.
Yeah, they're so subtle though, and they're so like
they really are.
It's really interesting. Like
I remember looking this up when I played it the first time and having gotten the suicidal ending and been like, "Come on! I examined this knife, and that you count that against me? I had no idea. Like that's unfair." But it's meant to be sort of maybe pseudo emergent in a way, exactly. Right? Of like it doesn't. It's not that it's fair or not. It's just how you played. Yeah, right. In subsequent playthroughs, there are there are extra items. I mentioned the chainsaw earlier. I had actually found another one that you can find. There are apparently 4 additional items that you can find. There's this white chrism, which you wouldn't have found. There's this white, it's like an anointing oil. I don't know. It's some religious thing. There's a book that you can find. There's a goblet you can find, and a second
only on subsequent
only after you've found the first 3 endings.
All 3 of them?
Exactly. So you have to have gotten all 3 endings, and then you can get a 4th ending where he is basically reborn. So you can go on and check that out in video. And then there are a couple of joke endings. So having gotten the regular 3 normal endings, there is a dog ending, which seems to be like a dog is controlling the game in some way. It's a goof. The dog ends up being in the observation room in the hotel that you can't get into. So there's a joke there. And then the greatest hits version has a... has the additional scenario, the Restless Dreams, and then there's a second scenario, I think, which is about Maria.
There's a UFO ending I read too.
This is the UFO ending that I'm talking about. So in the greatest hits version, there's additional content that you can play. It's like a separate scenario. And after you've beaten that, you can go back and play the main game and get this gem. And then if you use it in a few specific places, it will open it'll just end the 3rd time you've used the gem, and you'll get another joke ending about this UFO thing. So, yes, I encourage people to look those up on the net.
Wow.
Yep. Crazy game. I need to take a break because my throat is apparently dying, and then we'll come back and talk about some pillars.
That's good.
Welcome back from the break. As we kind of conclude this series, I think we've kind of sprinkled in some pillars throughout. And for me, one of the big pillars would have been the sort of Western versus Eastern horror, and how Western horror, I feel like, always has to end in triumph. And Eastern horror, I think, is more horrifying because it almost never does. European horror is kind of in between. But what are your thoughts, sir?
Yeah,
about this game?
This game has had a bigger impact on me than I would have anticipated. I have to say, I think I think we had an email about this along the way too. I guess I just fully misunderstood or misassumed what this game is. You know what I mean? Like I think because I had put it into the Resident Evil category in my head, it just caught me off guard in almost every way. And that's a good thing. But like, I feel like one of the pillars for me that I was surprised and kind of delighted about is they had a commitment to symbolism and themes. You know what I mean? That they, despite their ridiculous puzzle design, maybe there's some logic and symbolism in the puzzle design, but I don't think there is. I don't know what light bulbs in a tin can really mean,
and you never will.
But I need to tell you my theory about the red squares. But that commitment to the themes of it, combined with not even just a pillar, but the tonal aesthetic of the game being a psychological thriller versus really not a horror game or a horror, like a slasher kind of thing. It's
right.
Even
it's totally a psychological horror of any kind.
Yeah, psychological, but the focus is on psychology versus jump scares, or even just the concept of
right,
the radio,
and it gets to the psychology. The psychological things it chooses are fairly universal in the sense of Pyramid Head as possibly the id or whatever.
Yeah, the
but as this
symbolism.
force of sexual depravity of some kind, which just makes you uncomfortable. I mean,
the maturity of the game.
Just go back and listen to us talking about it in the first cast. And we both can't talk about it because it's so uncomfortable to discuss. What is he doing with that thing that's made out of two bottom halves of women's bodies? It's dark stuff.
And I mean that's another pillar for sure, right? Of just their commitment to a mature theme, and not M-rated. And in that video, that YouTube video I watched that fellow sent us,
right, and I'll put up a link in the show notes.
Yeah, it's. I think people would get a kick out of watching that. It's not that long. They kind of race through the game to show you some of the interesting things. But they called the first enemy that you meet this straitjacket. And it didn't even dawn on me that it is a straitjacket,
Sure, yeah.
And the I don't know why, it seems kind of obvious now, but the manifestation of those sort of psychological themes in enemy form, and then the whole caged creatures, each thing, and Pyramid Head, again, maybe one of the most iconic sort of like horror bosses of all time.
Right.
I mean, when you think of
even in Resident Evil, only in this one game until 2008 or so, when they brought him back in, and I'm sure they misused him, honestly, because I don't think a Western developer would have really got what he was about.
Well, he seems very specific to this story,
exactly.
So I think he's used in the movie, though, right? I think I remember seeing the trailer.
Right, but who knows, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
anyway,
I wouldn't expect Hollywood to do a good job of interpreting what's going on here either.
No, they just the point that probably Kojima and Guillermo del Toro were going to go after is they're just going to do their own thing, right? Which is the right way to go. Like you just got to take the general feel and tone of what this franchise is about and just do your own thing. Like don't try to make it part of, kind of basically the opposite of Metal Gear.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't try to connect anything. And then the last thought that I had as a general statement that I really appreciated was what I will summarize as sort of their commitment to, I guess I'll say economical design. That's both in level design and in sort of enemy design and flow of the spaces and the use of fog and darkness and their commitment to those.
The use of fog and darkness was gonna be my other pillar. So.
Oh, sorry. Yeah,
that's fine.
But why don't you talk about that? Tell me.
Well, so it's unique at this time to burn so much fill rate on particle effects that are basically near the camera. It is not something I think I saw. I can't remember another game like this. Most games at the time were trying to push out what they would render, make the draw distances, eliminate pop and things like that. And fog was used basically to hide the pop, but they try to put the distances pretty far out. And here they tried to bring that way, way far in so that in places which are enclosed and where you need the flashlight, they could then actually also do lighting effects. And one of the things we talked about off air was this was the time when different games were trying to put forward their best flashlight effect. And there was this sort of unofficial conversation going on amongst developers about who had the best flashlight effects. I remember Unreal, the original Unreal, having a flashlight, and it was even in the intro. It was really early in the game, and it was purely a vertex coloring trick. They would color the vertices of whatever the flashlight hit. And then later on, by 2000, I guess 3 or 4, Doom 3 comes out, and they went whole hog on the lights and the flashlight too, and everything was dynamic, and it was fairly amazing. And by then, the flashlight conversation was over, and that was sort of the end of this whole thing. So there's a period of 3 or 4 years where developers were all putting in flashlights and trying different things. Some would project textures, which would brighten artificially brightened just by having a white blending in texture at the end wherever it hit. Unreal tried to do a lighting trick where they, like I said, they lightened vertices. I can't remember any other specifics, but those are kind of the two ends. Here they're actually trying to cast some shadows, which was really not done because with the draw distances that we had, that other people were trying to achieve, you couldn't do that and render as much as you wanted to do, because even now shadows can be a very, very expensive process, because you're basically moving a camera to another position and doing this thing called the stencil buffer. There's tricks. I'm not going to go into it.
It's really effective in this.
It's super well done here, and it can only be done because they limit so close to where you are.
Yeah.
The drawing, and then they can actually make you the source of the light in that great way where it is not focusable. It's very hard to control. And so it gives another erratic quality to the lighting of, well, I'm shining a light where I'm facing, but it's very hard to control where I'm facing in a sort of fine-grained way. So the transitions from lighting are very abrupt often, and that's dramatic. That's what you actually want. And for horror, right, you want the flash of lightning, not because it's going to artificially brighten everything, but because it's going to cast shadows that are now weird and abstract and in a different direction than you're used to. And it gives a weird artificiality and different dimension to the space. And having a character who you can't control closely, I think achieves a similar goal with the flashlight being attached to his body, basically tucked in his pocket or whatever, or held in his hand, whatever he's doing. So
yeah, it's just they just made really smart and focused decisions about their design to allow them to push boundaries like this. You know, in a time where another thing that people were chasing was like, how do we get bigger and how do we do more, you know, and like more enemies on screen, bigger spaces, and, you know, and GTA was coming around, and, you know, on this platform and stuff like that. And this game, this game chose to focus, you know, and do kind of less better in that space. And I just appreciate that in that time when you have Final Fantasy VIIs of the world and eights,
right, sure, and stuff, on the nines. Well, even at this point, you're getting probably not too far off from 10. Although I feel like that was later in the cycle. What was I going to say? I feel like this is a thing that indie games today in the horror genre do a bit with, things like Penumbra, which has a really good lighting model, as I recall. And
that game is terrifying.
And what's their main one? Amnesia.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
which I just picked up for the PS4, so I'll check that out. Those are games that I feel like took some good lessons from this, at least in the environmental design. They're not going after the story psychological bit, but they are taking some good lessons from how to create horror just from the space and maybe a very simple enemy. Yeah. In the case of Amnesia. So
I guess, and I feel like, I think I maybe mentioned this before, but I'm just surprised at how, now playing this game, how Silent Hill probably has influenced these younger developers making horror games today. And I had always assumed it was coming from other, like Resident Evil and other places, but this actually was the game that really probably made people, you know, really like realize what they can do in the horror game space. So I'm glad we played it.
Yeah, it's absolutely one of my favorite games of all time, not just horror games, but it's a game that, especially playing it again, it might well be in my top 10. Because it has so much, there's so much here. And playing it again, it just reminded me of why I love this game so much. Even though like I said, my first playthrough was only 8 hours or whatever. It's not like I spent a huge amount of time in Silent Hill, but it has left a lasting mark. And I can't say that of games that I spent 10 times as much time in. So it's very rare that I can point out really story beats or emotional feelings or moments that I remember from other games that are much longer. This one just has it all. So
well said.
Yeah. All right. Well, with that, I guess unless you have something else pillar wise, I
Nope.
think we should let's turn to a few pieces of feedback, and then at the end of that, we'll talk about our next game, and talk about what we'll do there and why. You have the first email as usual.
Okay. So the subject is Indie Dev's Perspective from Jonathan DeLuca. We've heard from him before.
We've heard from Jonathan before, that's for sure.
Hello, lads. This doesn't really have anything to do with Silent Hill 2, but I had an idea pop into my head. Have you ever considered having an up-and-coming indie dev or a student as a guest to have a discourse about development in general? What about the possible differences between different generations of developers? I feel like that could be very interesting. Tim, I'd like to offer my services to help you get Brett back with some of those intros. Here's a freebie. So you want me to read this, Brett?
Sure, go ahead. I don't expect you to actually use this.
Okay, yeah.
We have an announcement after this email. So
I am working on some myself. But anyway, this is just a low-level example you should choose to employ me the quality. Should you choose to employ me, the quality will increase dramatically. So this is me. This is what I would say, as Jonathan has written. Tim, joining me today is a man who programmed so many wooden planks in Skyrim, he's still picking splinters out of his hands 6 years later. Cough, cricket, geez. Great. That's great. That's good, Jonathan. Yes, I might employ your higher quality. Though I do like that one. Your higher quality. Total cheese, but still funny in my opinion. I just want you to get your vengeance, Tim. Thank you, Jonathan. As always, love the show. Yes, I will. I have some thoughts. But
yeah. So about that, before we get to the other question, we've decided. Although I was tempted to say Tim will do the next 100 episodes after I do the first 100 episodes, I don't think I can take that kind of beating. So we're just going to have him do the prime numbered episodes. So he will come back in episode 89, I guess we decided, and he will have his first ever crack at me in the intro. So,
okay.
You have a few. Here we are I think we're in 86, I believe. 86. That's where we are. Right. So you will have 89, your
Yeah, I'm not the math smart person, so you'll have to tell me all the prime.
I will tell you the prime numbers, yes. As far as having a up and comer or something like that, I mean, I think we will. I'd love to have that happen organically as a result of something we try. So,
yeah.
If we do a stealth game or a boss focused game, like I would love to have the people who did, I think it's called Titan Souls or something like that, which is a one hit Titan boss battles. It's sort of Dark Souls, but with one hit kills of yourself.
Yeah, I've heard people talk about it.
If we were to play that in conjunction with something like Dark Souls would be a thing, right? And not that we'll be doing that anytime soon, but just as something that came off the top of my head, it would be great to have somebody who's mining the same ore, to have that a younger designer on to say, hey, you played this game, what did you take from it, and how does that reflect in your own work, and maybe have a conversation there. So that's my thoughts, but
yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think it should. I think it's a great idea, and it has come to my mind occasionally about how we transition to some of that stuff. The other thing that I just want to do in general, and I was actually talking to somebody at work about this, actually our composer on the game, and I think we need to. We've done a little bit of this because we had QA on, and we've had a couple different disciplines on, but I think we can go farther just with other discipline perspectives as well.
Yeah, for sure.
What I mean? We should have audio designer, director on. We should have music composition. There's a lot of untapped spaces. We've generally had design or creative directors on, so far with a few exceptions of people who do both, program and those things. But anyway. Right.
And I'm sure there are games where art direction really stands out in particular, and having an art director on would be really great.
Yeah.
I've just recently had to work to help hire an art director for the next game I'm working on. And that's an interesting process as a programmer, because for me, I don't care in a certain sense, right? That's not my thing. And so it would be really interesting to hear that perspective. And we'll have to keep an eye out for opportunities for that and break out of that. So I think there are lots of unheard of corners of development that we need to exploit. So I have the next email. It's from Caleb Smith. The subject is combining mature themes and game mechanics. It says, "Hey guys, just want to say that I love the show. I've been following you guys ever since Brett did that interview for Gama Sutra on his experience as lead systems programmer for Skyrim, which was extremely informative for me since I would like to be in a similar position once I jumpstart my career. Also, just wanted to mention that it was a real pleasure discovering that you guys worked on one of my favorite childhood games, Star Wars Starfighter. I have a lot of fond memories playing it with my brother and with being very frustrated with any kind of canyon level." So basically the first level. "Bouncing off of walls in a continual loop, not being able to course correct because the camera was being sent in every direction was a huge pain. But what a fantastic game experience that I wish more people would go back and visit. Anywho, on to this episode. What I found most interesting about your discussion surrounding Silent Hill 2 is that there's very little talk about the gameplay mechanics of the game. Instead, your focus seems to be on analyzing the themes of the game. This is in contrast to your Resident Evil series of podcasts where you almost exclusively talked about the survival horror mechanics of the game and only occasionally delved into thematic discussion. While I definitely place myself in the camp of gameplay over story any day, I think games like Silent Hill 2, Shadow of the Colossus, and Half-Life find a perfect symbiotic relationship between their game mechanics and narratives. Strip either from any one of these examples and you'll get a flatter experience. One thing I'm curious, so there's a few different spots here. One thing I'm curious about getting your guys' take on is why we don't see more Western games explore the mature level of themes that are present in Silent Hill 2. And he meant things like the Homecoming, Silent Hill Homecoming, which we've mentioned, Alan Wake, Dead Space, those sorts of things. He had a follow-up email to kind of clarify what he meant. If you look at a game like Outlast, while it was definitely graphic, it doesn't seem to get into the psychological dirt that Silent Hill does. And any darkness it does delve into focuses exclusively on the other, in caps, and how they threaten us. Whereas in Silent Hill 2, you guys seem to be really unnerved by a lot of the psychosexual themes in the game, probably because they hit something really deep in us. So are these more mature horror games ignored by Western developers because they're chasing after that pure Twitch scare factor? Or do they not trust their audiences enough to have them? And then, by the way, loved your call-outs to Lurking Horror. He says that's a scary text adventure, and Eternal Darkness. Still crossing my fingers that you'll actually eventually tackle Eternal Darkness because it's such a unique experience that plays with player expectations. And not just talking about the sanity effects, etc. And then I think, I'm going to skip a couple of things here, but some kudos to us, but it was getting a little bit long there. So, right. So I think we touched a little bit on whether Western games touch this stuff and why or why not. But the other question was how we've been talking about themes more than mechanics. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, I was thinking about it as you were reading. I think for me, one thing that probably happened in kind of not intentionally and not a great way is because I played on such a low difficulty, I think the mechanics didn't surface as much as they probably should and could for others who play. Like, I kind of am curious to maybe, I won't play through it all again, but I might start on a higher difficulty again to see what the difference is, because that will force the mechanics to be more valuable to me. To be honest, I just didn't value the mechanics because I didn't need to. Combat,
everything else is so rich.
Well, there's that, but also like there wasn't anything standing in my way. You know what I mean? Like usually mechanics, the right balance for mechanics needs to be in the forefront because you need to master them because the difficulty is forcing you to, you know what I mean, to succeed and to progress. And once I had enough ammunition, I didn't really fear anything from a combat perspective. So I didn't really delve into the mechanics. The one thing I did kind of appreciate kind of in the details with the melee combat is the sort of
it's a two-step.
Yeah, it's a two-step.
Wind up and swing. Wind up and swing.
Yeah, there's a commitment to the swings, right? And there's also two different kinds of swings. There's sort of the overhead if you press and hold, I think, and then then if you just tap it, you kind of wind. You can swing multiple times, kind of a little more flurry. But there's a commitment that you don't have in like an RE that's much more actiony in its use of that stuff, especially later. But and so yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I just don't think it was their focus. Like, I think he's right that they found a good balance for what they were trying to do. But as far as like mechanical richness, I personally wouldn't put this in the Shadow of the Colossus camp myself, at least based on how I played and what I played. Because I mean,
and there are mechanics I think we talked about, like the camera mechanics, and I think that the lighting turns out to be a mechanic that is maybe not super surfaced, but it is something we touched on, how you have to look at the map in a light. It's just that most of the game you have a light attached to you and you don't notice that. So there are mechanics that are maybe a little, they let them fade away. I feel the same way about the puzzles, in that most of the themed puzzles are not hard, but the theming makes them more interesting and makes them stand out, but not because they're hard mechanically. And the ones that are hard mechanically feel dumb and unmotivated often. So there's this, and anytime the mechanics start to come to the surface, I feel like it gets in the way of, it becomes an achievement thing and an ability thing. And that's not really what horror is about, as we kind of talked about. So in a certain way, I feel like the mechanics fading away is the best possible. So it's horror. It's not survival horror. And I think in survival horror, the survival is such a big part of it. And here it's how you feel, not how you get through it, get to the end. Right.
Yeah. And another important element, especially in survival horror with the mechanical loops, is resource, management. And because I was probably playing on an easier difficulty, like by the end of I never ever felt like I had an overabundance of resources.
Sure, yes. I was overpowered on every weapon.
Yeah, so that's like, part of that's the bread and butter for the mechanical loop of these sorts of games. Usually, where you really have to, use your stuff. I assume on higher difficulties they just don't place as many.
That's right.
As many resources.
Right. So you don't have the bullets for sure. When I played, my first time I played normal. Oh, and health. I played normal, or medium, or whatever. Not the hardest on either, but I played the middle rung on both. And definitely, as I said, I got the in water ending, which is the suicidal ending.
Yeah. So you were getting hit a lot.
I was getting hit a lot, and I think the enemies were a little more aggressive as well. So the nurses would come a little bit more quickly towards you and things like that, and the hospital in particular. So, yeah, it's interesting. Yeah. And there are some more modern examples of that tension that's interesting, with especially the, frictional games. Frictional games. People. Yeah. I'm like, I think I mentioned already on this series, I'm in the middle of Penumbra 1 because I'm going backwards to play that stuff before I eventually get to Amnesia. And, the mechanics are not super deep, but it's all about the tension, and such. So, because you're vulnerable, you're a very vulnerable character. So, yeah. Yep. Absolutely. All right. Hit us up with the final email that we have here. Yeah. So the horrors of yesterday, today. Michael Danielson. Yeah. Greetings, gentlemen. Awesome. Long-time listener. Yeah, well, I got close. Long-time listener, second-time mailer. Yes, it does ring a bell. Just finished part 2 of your Silent Hill playthrough, and your discussion at the end about the many horror games of yesterday got me thinking about a more recent game that really impressed me. The Last Door from 2014, and the follow-up with The Last Door Season 2 last year. I guess I haven't heard of these. I'll talk about them in a minute, but
okay. Yeah.
Mikael and I exchanged some email about it.
They are atmospheric horror adventure games that use what's been described as 8-bit-ish graphics and really deserves a look from anyone who likes the genre. The games do not require a long time investment and can be finished in 48 hours depending on how often you get stuck or just want to soak up the atmosphere. As a fellow H.P. Lovecraft aficionado, I would recommend to you, especially Tim, to take a look at these games. While not expressively based on any of his work, I found these games very successful in evoking many of the same sensations of dread, of the hidden and unknown that so permeate his stories. Can't wait for the thrilling conclusion of the best horror game ever made! Exclamation point. I agree, sir. My eyes are open now on Silent Hill 2. Thank you, Brett. Keep up the fantastic work. Best regards. Yeah, I think it is one of the best ever.
It might be the best. I don't know that I've ever played a horror. Well, the PT demo was.
Yeah, I haven't played that. So.
Oh my god. So
maybe next time we are together,
we can do it.
Yeah.
Record a session or something.
I feel like I've heard of The Last Door, but I
played The Last Door, and I may have sent it out to our group of beaten emails. I played The Last Door and both seasons of Last Door over last Christmas break or New Year's around then last year, and I can echo. I had said to Mikael via email that I wish I had thought of it because it is a lo-fi adventure game.
What kind of adventure game are you talking about? Like a
like a point and click. And it's I played it with the Steam controller, but basically as a mouse and keyboard. So a mouse and one button. Basically a mouse game, not even a keyboard game. And you're basically using context-sensitive cues to navigate and pick things up and examine things and things like that. And it's a story set in the Victorian era.
Ooh.
So yeah, it's one of it'll fit right in with your sensibility, and it's a story of it's kind of hard to describe, but there's a handful of young men. They're now older, but when they were young, they maybe had an encounter with the supernatural, and their memories maybe were kind of tinged by that, and they don't really remember it well. But now some of them have started dying, and one of them is investigating. And
sweet.
So you control the investigator, and some really weird stuff happens.
Okay, so that sounds great. Yeah, that's right.
It is really great, and it is when he says 8-bit, I would say it's more like a 320 by 240 graphics sort of style. So it's big pixels,
kind of.
Exactly, big pixels. Really, definitely a pixel graphic kind of game, and it doesn't feel like it would have felt out of place in a game 30 years ago. But I don't think that there would have been enough people playing this sort of thing then maybe. So I don't. It's hard to say.
Did you ever play?
It's also episodic, which is why there's 2 seasons. There's four episodes each season, I believe. So
Prisoners of Ice, I think it was called. It was a Call of Cthulhu adventure game, Sierra style adventure game.
I've heard of that. I have not.
That was good. Yeah, Reed and I both love that. And then there's another one that the name is escaping. That's in that same. I think it's actually a sequel, or maybe it was the prequel to that one. But low fidelity adventure game, but Cthulhu based. Kind of like the like Loom, but about Cthulhu stuff. And of course, there's Dark Corners of the Earth, which I still can't recommend enough.
Yeah, sure. I would echo that as well. I quite enjoy that game, although I'm not a huge fan of the one level people tend to really love about that game. But in general, I do quite enjoy that game as well. So it looks like there was a Dark Corners of the Earth. I don't know.
It's something of the Comet. It's Followers of the Comet or something. It's about course with all the astronomy based horror with that series. So
Okay, yeah. So prisoner of ice.
Yeah.
Shadow of the Comet. Yes.
Shadow of the
Okay.
Comet. Yeah, they're on
It's
GOG,
a
I think. Yeah,
right.
good old games.
It's a follow up to Infogram's earlier Shadow of the Comet. So,
Oh, Infogrames, right? Which they also did the original Alone in the Dark, which is also Cthulhu based. That's when they
there
went
we go.
3D. Yeah,
Yeah.
precursor to RE. Yeah, yeah.
Yep. When Infograms went 3D, it's like Dylan went electric, I guess. Actually, when LucasArts went 3D, it's probably more like Dylan going electric. Anyway, okay, so yeah, that's our feedback. Thanks for sending that in to devgameclub@gmail.com. We love to have your feedback, and obviously, we often read it and discuss it on the air. So thank you very much to Jonathan, Mikhail, and Caleb. And why not? I'm going to let you, since my voice is shot, introduce our next game.
Yes, we as always we try to have timely games to play, even though these are games of yesteryear and classic games from the past. There's still times when they are relevant for today, and of course, with Mario Odyssey coming out, we had threatened before when we played Super Mario World that we would eventually play 3D Mario to investigate sort of the genesis of the 3D platformer camera specifically is, I think, something that's we're going to talk a lot about. And of course, Mario 64 is the game and really the ultimate example of that transition of platformer from 2D to 3D, the expression of that. And so Nintendo, obviously, being the one to kind of crack that nut, really doing the best job back then. And I remember starting the game, but never finished it. Didn't get that far as already a self-admitted, not Mario fan. So yeah, Mario 64. We're going to play next in honor of Mario Odyssey, Super Mario Odyssey. And
yeah, I think it'll be particularly interesting having so recently played Super Mario World to talk about that transition. And I don't know whether you'll have the wherewithal to get a hold of a Switch before we get to the end of that series, but I've already put in an order to get a copy of Odyssey. Should come in the next couple of days. So at the very least, I can talk about that at that point. I have played almost every Super Mario 3D game. I played Galaxy, but not the second Galaxy. And I didn't play... There might be a Mario on the 3DS that's a full 3D game that I didn't play. That's mainly 3D. Even though they're mostly rendered in 3D, some of them are 2D perspective, even though they're 3D rendered. So I don't know. There might be Super Mario Land or something might be 3D.
I did... I bought that on my 3DS. I got Super Mario Land, and it is... it's interesting. It's pseudo 3D. It's very interesting game. Yeah.
Yes, that's one I'd like to take a look at some point. It's one of those ones that I knew was, as a Mario fan, that I would probably enjoy, but hadn't gotten around to.
I think you would. Yeah, I think you would enjoy it. Yeah, and pseudo 3D is funny with that game because it's. I don't mean the 3D. I mean the 3D camera. Yeah. Anyway.
Right.
Hard to talk about on the 3DS, but
yes, exactly. The 3DS with its weird technological choices. Which is a whole thing that someday we might have to talk about.
Probably,
it's choice to make real 3D out of the two screens, and what a weird. That's just such a weird thing. It's still a weird thing. That's a
I
thing
will be playing Mario 64 on the 3DS.
I will be playing it on the Wii because it's available on the Virtual Console, and it was not. I don't think it was ever available other than on the Nintendo 64. I don't think it was on the GameCube at all. I was able to get Zelda games on that, but not the.
Right, I don't think so. Yeah,
I don't think they ever did a Mario thing on that. So yes, I've played a bunch of things. I played Sunshine. I played Galaxy. I'm looking forward to going back to 64. I have played it. I didn't get 150 stars or whatever, but I did get a pretty substantial number and finished the game. I played that while we were working on Starfighter. I want to say maybe in between Starfighter and Jedi Starfighter when we were in submission. So it's been quite a while for me, and I look forward to it. So,
As far
Well,
as
that's
where we're going to play to,
I will put that out on
do a
Twitter.
little investigating, but
You're right. I was going to go there next, which is you can follow the cast at Dev Game Club on Twitter. I will be putting out how far to play. I think we'll probably just play the intro world, but I don't even remember how to describe that. So there will be something coming out in the next few days about that on the Twitter to check that out. In the meantime, you can also find me on Twitter, though admittedly, as I said before, I'm still taking a break, but at Brett_Duville, and he is
at Tim Longo Jr. with the JR at the end.
He takes breaks all the time. He just doesn't dignify them. He's just very infrequently on there. But I am always checking at Dev Game Club, and of course the email address devgameclub@gmail.com. Thanks so much for listening and for taking a long and scary walk through Silent Hill with us. And I will probably not sleep again, but for now, good night.
Good night.